Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning how to add and subtract in scientific notation. But before we do so, we're going to review how to convert from scientific notation to standard form, and then from standard form to scientific notation. So here I have two values written in scientific notation. The first one has a positive integer exponent, and the second one has a negative integer exponent. So by looking at the first one, based on our previous video, we know that if we're multiplying by 10 to the power of 8, we're multiplying by a large value. And if we're multiplying by 10 to the power of negative 4, we're multiplying by a small value. And that's because here I have 10 times 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 10. And that's basically 10 times itself 8 times. Here I have 10 to the power of negative 4, and that's the same thing as 1 over 10 to the power of 4. And that would make that value smaller. So for the first one, we learned a shortcut in our previous video. Here we have 2 and 425,000. And if we're multiplying by 10 to the power of 8, we're going to move our decimal to the right 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to place our decimal here. And we're going to add zeros as place value holders. And here I have 242,500,000. Here for my next problem, I have 4 and 1/10 times 10 to the power of negative 4. And based on our previous video as well, we learned a shortcut where we could take 4 and 1/10 and move our decimal over to the left 4 times. And don't forget to add a 0. And here I have a very small number because I'm multiplying by 10 to the power of negative 4. So that's the difference between multiplying by 10 to the power of a positive and a negative integer. A positive exponent will give you a larger number, and a negative exponent will give you a smaller number. So here I have two values, and this time I'm writing them into scientific notation. So they're currently in standard form. And in order to convert this to scientific notation, I know that my first value has to be between 1 and 9. So I'm going to place my decimal here because 7 and 75/100 is between 1 and 9. And here, I'm going to multiply by 10. I know that the exponent is going to be positive because this is a number that's larger than 1. And here, if I started here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I moved my decimal 6 places, and it's 10 to the power of 6. So here, you could always go back and double check your answer. Remember that if we have a number that's larger than 1, we multiply times 10 to a positive integer, and a number that's smaller than 1, we'd multiply times 10 to the power of a negative integer. So here I have a value that's smaller than 1, so I know that I'm going to multiply it times 10 to a negative integer. So I'm going to rewrite our value. And I want my first value to be between 1 and 9. So I'm going to put my decimal here because by being here, I would have 4 and 49/100. And I would have to multiply that by 10 to the power of negative 3. And that's it. So now that we've gone over how to convert from standard form to scientific notation and scientific notation to standard form, we're going to learn how to add in scientific notation. So here I have 4 and 28 hundredths times 10 to the power of 5 plus 5 and 9 tenths times 10 to the power of 2. Now, the easiest thing that I recommend is changing these two into standard form, adding them, and then converting them back. So now that I've converted these two into standard form, I could simply add as I normally would. So I'm going to do that over here on the side. So I have 428,000 plus 590, and I would just add that as I normally would. In this case, this problem is very, very easy. And now that I have our sum, I'm going to change that back into scientific notation. So in order to convert it to scientific notation, I know that my decimal has to be between the 4 and the 2. So I'd write that out times 10 to the power of 5, and now we're done. Here I have two more problems in scientific notation, and we're going to add them, but first we're going to convert them into standard form before we add. So 4 and 8 tenths times 10 to the power of 4, we're going to move our decimal to the right 4 times. And 7 and 58 hundredths, we're going to move our decimal to the right 5 times. And now we're just going to add. And now that I've added, I'm going to convert our answer back into scientific notation. So I know my decimal, I want it between the 8 and the 0, because now I have a value between 1 and 9. And I know my exponent is going to be 5 because there's 5 spaces away from the decimal to the end of our number. So for the next one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to first convert it into standard form, and then I'm going to add and change it and convert it back to scientific notation. Now that I've added, I'm going to change our answer. to scientific notation. And that's it. So here's two more problems. And instead of having positive exponents, we have negative exponents here. So 10 to the power of a negative exponent. And we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to take our values and then we're going to convert them into we're going to convert them into standard form and then change them back into scientific notation. And now that we've converted it into standard form, we're going to add. Remember that when we're adding decimals, we line up our decimal places. And if our number looks off like this, you could add a 0 as a place value holder. And now that we've added, we could go back now and convert our answer into scientific notation. I want my decimal to be here because then our value will be between 1 and 9. And that's it. So we're going to do the same thing with my final example here for addition. And now we're going to add. I'm going to put my decimal in between the 9 and the 5 to convert it into scientific notation. So that's multiplied by 10 to the power of negative 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. So let's go over how to subtract in scientific notation, which is very similar. So we're going to take our two values, convert them into standard form, and then we're going to do the same thing and convert them back into scientific notation. Now we're going to convert this into scientific notation. And that's it. So we're going to do 4 more examples. So first thing, take our values, change them to standard form. And then once we're done with that, we're just going to subtract and then convert it back into scientific notation. And after we subtracted, we're going to convert this back into scientific notation. I'm going to put my decimal between the 6 and the 0. And that becomes 6.042 times 10 to the power of 4. And so we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to take our values. We're going to convert them from scientific notation to standard form. And now we're going to convert this back into scientific notation. And that's it. So last 2 examples, and for these last 2 examples, I have 10 to the power of a negative integer. So same thing, convert them to standard form, subtract, and then convert them back into scientific notation. And once I have my value, I'm going to change it back into scientific notation. So here I have 7 times 10 to the power of negative 3. Same thing for my last problem. And now we're going to just convert that into scientific notation. And that's it. That's how you add and subtract in scientific notation.